methods, work in the garden, the field, study nature. That's God's way. But there's also another way. Wearisome, routine of abstract lessons, lessons from books that's hard to remember. Right? These are the two main forms of education, main options that we have today. So we have to choose. Do we want to be instructed by God's way or not? Now, the big takeaway from this, if you get nothing else, is understand that this is a choice. This is a binary choice. You're either doing God's way of studying or you're doing man's way of studying. There is no blending here. You cannot blend the two. Proverbs reminds us that we are to trust in God and not to lean to our own understanding. We are to look to God as the source of our knowledge, not look to man, not look to each other. If we listen to him, he'll guide us. And so that's what it comes down to. Education, along with a lot of other things, is simply a choice. Do we trust in God or do we trust in self? Do we trust in man? Do we trust in the worldly way of doing things? And again, these are two different opportunities. Two choices represented by two trees in the Garden of Eden. One was the tree of life, which bears the fruit of true education. And the other is the tree of knowledge, which bears the science or false science. And again, this morning's presentation before was fantastic because he's showing, look, this is getting back to where this stuff comes from. And that is the essence of true education. God placed a mechanism. Really, it's a mechanism of do we trust God or not, right? There wasn't anything special about eating from the tree of knowledge or the tree of life in the sense of it was a mechanism there for them to show their trust in God or have a way to exercise their free will. And now when we look at it as in the context of education, in the context of even how we go about doing things like we learned earlier with how we garden, what we see is that it's a choice, and it's a choice of trust. Cain and Abel later, let's move forward in time. This is a history lesson of time. We move forward in time. Cain and Abel were given a choice. Cain was told, and Abel was told, the same advice. This is how you worship God. This is how you offer a sacrifice to God. And Cain decided that he had better ways of doing that sacrifice. Cain wanted to bring his own way. He disregarded the requirements of God. He used human reasoning on his altar of sacrifice. Right? We understand that Abel brought the offering that God required. How are we offering our sacrifice? Is it in trust, the way God has asked us to? Or are we using our human reasoning to outsmart God and do the things that we believe? Now, we know how that story ended. Cain disregarded the instruction, leaned his own reasoning, and became a murderer. We also see how Cain, started to form, this sons of man, the lineage that came out of Cain. We see how that ended up. Sodom and Gomorrah, etc. We also see how God instructed Seth, to move into the mountains, right? To be away from the corrupting influence. We read this here. As long as Seth and his family maintained separation, right? There were two separate classes. Cain dispersed all over the plains and valleys, where the children of Seth then escaped this contaminating influence and went to the mountains. And so long as there was a separation continued, the maintained worship of God in his purity. But unfortunately, that separation didn't last that long, and they started to mingle together. Are we mingling what God's education system he desires from us with the worldly education system? Are those being mingled together? And what is the result? The association was productive of the worst results. So our mingling of things that God has not asked us to do will not result in good outcomes. We read here that they were attracted to the world, right? And that displeased God. And the worshipers were beguiled into sin. They lost their holy character. They lost their unique identity. Right? And even the fourth commandment, the seventh-day Sabbath. So here's something interesting again. They became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge. So they're saying, we don't even want God in our knowledge. We don't really want to remember, the lessons that, great-grandfather Adam wants to teach you sitting on his knee, right? We don't want to go to God for these lessons. In fact, they didn't want God in their knowledge. They wanted to not even factor him in the equation. And so what did God do? He gave them over, right, to a mind void of judgment. He allowed them to just go down that path, but there was no knowledge in that path. They're fools, thinking that they're smart. So let's analyze this further. They did not retain God in their knowledge. This started the formation of the school of man. The lesson book was self, and the instructor was their own understanding. And this process has carried forward, this education of the sons of man has carried forward. And we can start seeing the trait of this education as formed through Jesuit universities. The memory was cultivated. So this is coming from Rosencrantz Philosophy on Education. The following methods are characteristic of Jesuit schools. The memory was cultivated as a means of keeping down free activity and thought of, and clearness of judgment. So the whole purpose of this method of control, this education system that was implemented, that we see, if we were to go back in time, we see like we had the scholastic, what we had before that, we had the craft guilds and the merchant guilds, and then we move into these scholastic guilds or the universitas system. That's all Jesuit foundation. Our schools, and this is not like a weird conspiracy thing, it's in their history books, right? Ellen White says the same things in Studies in Christian Education. It has ever been the policy of the papacy to sterilize the brains of teachers so they cannot be impregnated with the reform ideas. Again, it's just a matter of understanding our history. If we go back in time, right, in the early 1500s, there became this movement, right? The Reformation, the protest movement. And because ultimately we understand that the Knights Templar were all wiped out a couple hundred years before, they weren't ready for this Reformation. And so what do? They reignited. And we understand that they've rebuilt ultimately with the Knights Templar, which is now the Jesuits, right? And that was rebuilt. And one of the first things they did, and again, this is just great controversy history. Ellen White tells us the first thing they did was they attacked, the education systems. Because if they can stop the education systems, they can stop the protest. And they did really good. Congratulations. They did great. So the question is, how do we know if it's a Jesuit-minded university or not? And the answer is, it's any university where the students have spent their time crowding the minds with knowledge, very little could be realized, and content to depend on the judgment and perception of others. That's what Ellen White says. So this would be the definition of is the education system founded in God's way or man's way? Again, I'm not pointing fingers. I just feel like, and this may be uncomfortable truths, I just feel like we need to just be real with what the history looks like. Because the mind that depends on the judgment of others is sooner or later to be misled. We cannot, Ellen White tells us so many times, and we're told in the Bible so many times, the need to be individuals, the need to understand individuality and the importance of having that personal relationship with God. Not a relationship with your pastor who then connects you with God. That doesn't work. You need a close and intimate and a personal relationship with God. We are not to follow after the patterns, right, that the man gives us. So the question is, do we want for ourselves and our children true education from the source, from the tree of life? Or are we satisfied with trusting our own reasoning and accepting the ways of man, allowing our children to be taught atheism, right? Allowing our children to be taught, evolution, heavy focus on memorization. And one of the most dangerous things is a love for money. We are taught world standards. I can't go do farming. Those guys are peasants. I don't want to do farming. I'm going to be out in the field. They don't make money. I got to go to the city. I got to make real money. Well, that was my path because I was third-generation Adventist, raised using Sunlight curriculum homeschooling. I got to high school and I realized that Sunlight did not work for high school. And I just wanted to be around friends and do other things. So I went to high school in a public system. And they offered me, hey, if you can come take this, if you come take this test, you can eat free donuts. And I was raised very strict without sugar. Oh, I'll take some donuts. And so I went in there and I took the test and I scored really well. And they said, okay, choose any branch of the military you want. You want Air Force? Here's the jobs. So I went in the Air Force, right? That's the whole point, is it sucked me into this whole path. And I went down a path. My first company was very successful. And I made my first million quick on. And that brought me down another path where I just chased money. And it took God to literally stop me and have to reset. In the last 6 years, it's just been a reset of everything that I know, including a few slides from this morning. Was also some powerful, oh yeah, right? You know about till and no-till, because I'm all bought into no-till, but now I'm going to have to rethink these things. Okay? So it's this idea that we can't marry the two, right? So do we value worldly standards, worldly success, over what true success looks like? Or are we valuing the earthly over the heavenly? Because be very clear, they're two very different directions. We read that after sin entered the world, God transplanted the tree of life to the paradise above, but he didn't just remove it entirely. He allowed its branches to hang onto the wall. So while the tree of life is now in heaven, its branches touch down here into earth, and we can still grab a hold of those branches, right? But we see that there's another tree, the tree of knowledge, that has its roots in the earth, and it's of the earth, and it's earthly. So are we feasting from a tree who's worldly, who is rooted in the ground, or are we reaching up for a higher branch to come out of this world? Again, you can't serve two masters. These are not things that can be, there is no reconciliation of these two items. You'll get cognitive dissonance if you try. It's either God's way or man's way. It's that binary. And as we start looking through this, eating from the tree of life, right? Eating from the tree of knowledge, they're founded fundamentally different. The tree of life is founded on trust versus the tree of knowledge. Scientific knowledge is all about doubt. How do I disprove that? That's science. Let me disprove this thing. And to me, it sounds good because I was in that space. I loved it. I was like, oh yeah, I like this. I'm so logical. I can disprove things. But I realized that's not God's way. And so while it seems attractive and it seems smart, it's foolishness because God has given us up to our reprobate mind. Is our indoctrination of free will, of individuality, or is our indoctrination of control? And again, Ellen White talks so many times about the method of education. We need practical education. We need practical applications. If it's memorization, it's not God's way. Are we explaining our existence through evolution or creation? What's the setting? Is it a classroom setting that's an industrial area that you can't see the beauty of nature outside your window? Or are you able to be surrounded by nature and actually see God's handiwork all around? Right? What is our focus? Is it on greed or is it on generosity, other-centeredness? Right? Are we out to win or are we out to serve? Ultimately, we have to understand true education is not preparing us only for this lifetime. Ellen White says it's for this lifetime and the lifetime to come. Now, this is not a small matter. Our education is actually a salvational choice. We read, now as ever before, we need to understand the true science of education. If we fail to understand this, we will never have a place in the kingdom of God. Are we letting that sink in? Do we see that? That true education is more than just what I learn. It's how I learn, and it's how I put faith, and it's how I literally build the character. It's the foundation of everything. And if we don't understand God's way, how are we going to do his work? And so it starts looking like this is a choice between, without getting super drastic, but it is dramatic, a choice between the mark of the beast or the seal of God. Right? We are supposed to be a chosen generation that finishes the work. And yet, what's our focus?
Could you maybe back up
Yes.
more to the last one? One more? Yep. MS-76, okay.
Yes. And by the way, all these presentations, I can send a link to the whole library you guys can have. And these are all open source, so you guys can also take these, rebrand them, and use them. They're open source presentations. So more than our own salvation, we are to be co-workers, co-laborers with God, right? It says, all who have tasted the heavenly fruit, if you have studied in the tree of life, if you've been through true education systems, and you've tasted that, Your calling is to be a co-laborer that points people from the tree of knowledge, the worldly ways, the worldly methods, back to the tree of life, so they may also partake of the fruit. That's a powerful calling. Ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a peculiar people. Right? Sometimes we kind of gloss over these and like, yeah, okay, that makes me feel good, but no, it's not just it's a calling. It's a responsibility, it's a duty. How do we become a peculiar people? How do we become this chosen generation? And have we actually forgotten what our role is and what our identity is? The Jews forgot their identity. They hung on to the tradition, but they didn't understand the purpose. Are we in the same boat? When we read 2 Peter, it says, looking forward to the coming of the day of God. That's how some people read it. Oh, I'm just looking forward to Christ returning. Great, so am I, but that's not it. We are given a message that we are to look for it and hasten. That is an active role on our part. The end times are not a passive movement. The end times is an active movement. It's a co-laborership. That means we have to be jointly working with God in order to prepare for his return. We read again that the Spirit of prophecy teaches that by giving the gospel to the world, it is in our power to hasten the Lord's return. It is in our power. And I'll also say that it's not just by giving, it's living, but I'll talk about that in a second, in the next, I believe that's in the next course. So it is in our power to hasten God's return. So if we keep saying, well, Christ didn't come in my parents' timeline, he didn't come in my childhood, okay, well then maybe look at yourself. Maybe look at us, maybe look at our surroundings, maybe look at our church. What's the state that we're in? Do we understand true education enough to complete the work that's supposed to be done for him to return? A quick point, well, I'll get it later. We cannot finish the work taught with a Babylonian mindset. If our mindset is locked in Babylonian training, we are unfit, as Ellen White says, to perform the work. This idea comes from John the Baptist. John the Baptist was led by the Spirit of God into the wilderness, away from the contaminating influence of the city, to obtain education that would qualify him to receive instruction from God. We need to get to a space where we're even qualified to get instruction. Rather than any form of learned scribes, he went to the wilderness. He was not to connect himself with the rabbis, lest he became acquainted with their teachings, their maxims and traditions. The more easily the Lord could impress his mind and give him the pure mold of truth that was to be given to the people to prepare a way for the Lord. John the Baptist's role was to prepare for Christ's return. What is our role? If anything other than to prepare for Christ's return. And so what we see here is that he had to get away from the rabbis. I'll let you make the parallel with what current rabbinical schools look like in the Adventist church. You can make that own parallel. The training of the rabbinical schools would have unfitted him for his work. We cannot be mixing the two education systems. Those that are wanting to truly prepare for Christ's return and hasten Christ's return must go through a different type of school. We must see this link, right? Pattern matching. In writing and speaking in the life of John the Baptist, as well as in the life of Christ, Ellen White has tried to present that which has been present to her in regard to the education of our youth. This is a powerful statement. We are under obligation to God to study this subject candidly, for it is worthy of close, critical examination upon every side. So we have an obligation to understand this. Review and Herald reads here, Ellen White wrote, how John the Baptist, being this messenger, prepared the way for the Lord, right? And she writes, John had not been educated in the schools of the rabbis. He had attained no human scholarship. What's that? He doesn't have a degree? Oh, what is he going to do with his life? His poor parents. Has a son with no degree. Okay, I'm sorry. God and nature had been his teachers. The forerunner of Christ did not expose himself to the evil conversations and corrupting influence of the world. Right? It's this idea that for him to do his work, he had to be brought out. And what did the world say about him? The world looked at him and said, you are no one regarded as qualified to be a religious teacher unless he had studied in rabbinical schools. So unless they went through the school system, they were unqualified. But both Jesus and John the Baptist had been represented as ignorant because they did not receive this training. So by world standards, John the Baptist and Jesus were ignorant and not worthy to listen to. Do you want to be ignorant of the world like Jesus was? Do you want to be ignorant of the world like John the Baptist was? Or is it important that we get that piece of paper? Right? By the way, I never got any college degree. I was, unfortunately, in the world very successful. You don't need a college degree to be successful. What you need is learn how to solve problems. Every entrepreneur understands how to spot a problem, how to solve a problem. If you know how to solve problems, you make tons of money. It's just ridiculous amounts of money you can make. The problem is, when you're doing this, if you're not founded on true education, that money will corrupt you. And that's what happened to me. So the point is this: what do we value more, instruction from God or Babylonian accreditation? Now, this is something, anytime I mention this, it ruffles some feathers, right? Because this goes against a whole system of what we've been building. I'm not going to say it has to be torn down. I'm not going to say anything, but I do run a true education center in Romania that I hope that we can take the concept of and augment our current education system. The true higher education is that which is imparted out of him whose mouth comes knowledge and understanding. We have to just look to God as our instructor. We don't actually even need man. We need to have a reorientation back to God, and God will do the rest. God will work through that. We also need mentorship and we have the other things, but we got to reset this whole process. We need to completely reset what success looks like, and that's at all levels. It is God's intention that the system of true education, right, continues for this man indefinitely. The system of true education, instituted at the beginning of the world, was to be a model for man throughout all time. So we can't say, yes, that was the Garden of Eden, but we're living in an industrial age now. We're living in a post-AI age, so we have to go back to we're all going to be out of jobs anyways, right? So you got to be thinking about, that was God's original plan. There is no better plan, because it's the plan that's going to be re-implemented. The Garden of Eden was a representation of what God planned that the whole world would become. Thus, in time, the whole earth would be occupied with homes and schools where the words and works of God would be studied. Is our focus in our schools the words and works of God and his creation? This was the method of education that God desired to happen with Egypt. So let's just go back to this period of time. We're taking a walk through time, and we've walked our way up to the exit of Egyptian captivity. What was the state of man post-Egyptian captivity? We read that they were few prepared to be workers, few that even had the capacity to train their own children. People coming out of Babylon were not even qualified to train their own children. The parents themselves needed instruction, discipline. So in order for the parents to get to a state that they could train their own children, there needed to be a train-the-trainer program. Parents needed to be trained on how to actually train true education. The parents themselves needed instruction and discipline because they were victims of this lifelong slavery. They were ignorant, untrained, and degraded. Is there a parallel to the world we live in now? Are there parents that fit that same description of what it looked like when coming out of Egypt? Are there parents with little knowledge of God and little faith in him? Are they confused by false teachings? Corrupted by long contact with heathenism? So what happened? God intervened. He didn't leave his people alone. And to meet this growing evil, God provided other agencies to aid parents in the work of education. And this was the work that was given to Samuel to start. Though not so directly inspired or divinely called to instruct the people in the works and the ways of God, for the training of such a class of teachers, Samuel, by the Lord's direction, established the school of the prophets. So, the school of the prophets was established as God's way to retrain the parents and even students directly to get them back, pointing back in the right direction. So, that last piece, we can see we are now formed, right? We find the pattern The school of the prophets, the lesson books are the works and ways of God. We still need nature as our lesson book, but now we've added on this idea that it's more specific. The lesson book is nature, but specifically the works and ways of God as we are revealed through object lessons in nature. And the instructors at this point, in this instance, are people, and it says here again, these are not people divinely called to instruct. When I came to Romania, I had no intention of creating a school. I was going to create an entrepreneurship center, but like an incubator program. And I kind of got stumbled in this thing, and I thought, well, I can't teach this thing because I'm completely uneducated. I don't have a college degree, right? I'm not educated. I can't teach people. And then God's like, no, just study true education more. I'm like, and I'd ask people, what's true education? And they're like, mind, spiritual. I don't read it. It's in true education. That's. I never could get a solid answer. I'll talk about that in the next session. But the more I understood it is that true education is about us, just the common people that say, I want to put the focus back on God, and everything needs to be focused back on God, creating a setting where God can reach them, right? We don't have to be highly educated to teach kids. All we have to do is foster an environment for them to learn nature, right? Point them back to God and read the counsels, the works and ways of God. The schools of the prophets were founded by Samuel. Now here's the reasons, right? As a barrier against widespread corruption, to provide for the moral and spiritual welfare of the youth, and to promote future prosperity, financial sustainability of the nation by furnishing it with men qualified to act in fear of God as leaders and counselors. So what was the output of the school of the prophets? Was leadership. That's why I'm trying to start this movement around Advent leaders. I encourage anyone here that says, I would like to be a mentor, let's start building a directory of mentors. Let's build a directory of people and say, hey, you know what? By the way, I think you're a treasure, and I think you need to get back out in the field, and I think you need to have, 5 or 10 kids out there learning from you. I think other people can do database. I think there needs to be financial support for you to get back in the field. That's my whole point. It troubles me to understand that a mind like yours that has decades of experience is not using that for true education. We need to be putting funds together to support these centers and to actually bring educators in a way that they can do this and it's sustainable. So let's look at the pattern again. What is this? The framework is here. Country living is a barrier against the widespread corruption. Moral and spiritual welfare, that's an upward focus. That's pointing people back to God. And this idea of promoting future prosperity is missional entrepreneurship. Missional entrepreneurship is the idea that business and religion are not two separate things, they're one. In 2 weeks, we're holding a missional entrepreneurship seminar in central Romania. It's free if anybody wants to come to it. And our focus is on reactivating the medical missionaries who've gone through training and then went back to a job that allowed them to pay because they couldn't figure out how to make it sustainable. So if medical missionary is the right hand of the gospel, business is the left hand. You've got to use both hands. Right? And so that's this whole idea of how do we get that focus back? Living in the country, running missional businesses, having a foundation in God. And from this is where, and I'll explain where I got this framework in the next class, in the next session. But from this is where we developed a foundation of what is true education. And I'll talk about this next time, but it's restore, develop, and realize. And this is what was used as the foundation for a true education center that we started in Romania, where we're focusing on the works of God, practical labor, and missional entrepreneurship. I believe that there needs to be a network of these, and I'll talk in the next presentation of what a tactical plan could be to roll those out. But ultimately, that's what we're doing right now. For the last year, our goal has been developing practical, logical, and spiritual future leaders. And when we understand, Ellen White has some texts about how tall trees shade the little trees from growing, and this idea that if there's just a bunch of dominant old graybeards out there, we're not going to finish the work, guys, right? It's the youth that are going to finish the work. So why are we out there, right? We need to be out there lifting up and bringing leaders in mentorship programs, apprenticeship programs, however you want to look at them, where we can start transferring this knowledge or just pieces, right? I think there's probably 20 different subspecialties of people that should be underneath you, learning each of these subspecialties and taking one piece and diving deeper and deeper and deeper into it. So I recommend reading, obviously the book by Ellen White on true education. In that we talk about the world has had its great teachers, men and women of giant intellect and extensive research, people who have stimulated thought and opened to view vast fields of knowledge. But there is one who stands higher than they. The human mind, is brought into communication with the mind of God, the finite with the infinite. In this communication is found the highest education. Dear Lord, it's my plea, Lord, that you inspire in our hearts a need just to come back to you, a need for a revival, for a reset, for fundamentally just a shift. Lord, help us to have on our hearts a desire to support those that have done the research in this and to bring up to be mentors for new generations of leaders. Lord, we ask that you start a movement that allows us to reset the focus of the youth, help them understand their calling, help them understand the identity and their need in order to just look to you as the foundation, help them to learn more practical skills, help them to move away from what the world sees as success. And Lord, we just ask that you bring us closer to you. I ask you to continue to bless this retreat, and thank you for the organizers. Lord, please send your Holy Spirit here. Help this not to be a retreat we just leave and do nothing at, but help this to be a catalyst for a movement. We ask in Jesus' name, amen.
Don't leave, stay here, please. This is not the finish of the workshop, please stay. I think we should have a discussion.
I would love that. I wanted to give a little extra time to have some time for talking.
You are punctual, you finish on time, so we still have those 15 minutes that we can use it. So, yeah, if anybody.
Sir.
So with your entrepreneurial training...
Just a bit louder that we all hear.
So for the entrepreneurial training that is to empower the medical missionaries to be able to stay in the field, does that mean it's in the same field of medical missionary entrepreneurship that enables them to earn a living while doing it? So it's not pulling them away to earn money to do it?
Correct. So I think there's two scenarios. And the question is, a concern is that we don't get medical missionaries too involved in business where they can't practice, right? I think there's a couple pieces. Ellen White has counsel that says those with gifted ability must be supported by, right? She says the pastors with a gift for evangelism or something along this line, I'm paraphrasing, should be supported by means of business, means of business. So I think the first scenario is we need to understand how we have to come together. And I believe that the answer, which I'll talk about in the next session, is a combination of, the hand, the heart, and the head, essentially. They have the ability to make money. You should be supporting those that are doing amazing work but don't. That's one piece. That only goes so far. The second piece of that is until we reach ultimately maybe the shaking, we may not see that harmony that we found in Acts 4. Short of that, the idea is how can we at least be more sustainable? If we can see problems and we can see how to solve problems in a way, there are some classes who have a desire from the heart to do medical ministry, let's say working in a sanitarium directly, and they're employed there, and that's fantastic. There are others that have, I was talking with Christy, he's all fired up, he's being going, he's like, man, Rob, did you know that Ellen White was like revived by Kellogg, using like hot and cold water? No, I didn't know that. Why isn't there somebody studying that and seeing and so, one of the things I'm looking to encourage would be an incubator for getting back to the roots and having the spaces where they could practice maybe things that are not mainstream things, not crazy things, but like the idea of just kind of going back to that. The bottom line is there are opportunities to earn revenue while doing the Lord's work. Ellen White says business and ministry are not two separate things, they're one. And I believe that there are ways that just thinking differently, whether it's you're doing this medical missionary work, let's say as you've been doing it, but maybe you start creating a course that you can now offer that course online. It's an idea of scaling your time, right? entrepreneurs understand that one of the first things is you've got to scale to a degree. Not so much that you disconnect with your audiences, but thinking about what's the next level. Could I have a wide funnel, a wider reach? Maybe it's through a course, or maybe it's through speaking, and then bring them into maybe a group setting, and then bring them into a one-on-one setting where you can understand the value of your time. But again, the purpose of this next retreat, specifically for medical missionary, is actually an exploratory one. I don't have the answers. And so we're going to be holding an unconference. A piece of it is an unconference where we can ask questions like this and learn from others' experience. I recognize that I still have blind spots from being in the world, right? I have to, and it's been 6 years that I've been trying to remove these blind spots, but there's still others where a multitude of counselors is the best approach. And so for me, what I have in my heart is mostly facilitating dialogue and creating a movement that people from different angles can kind of come together and see what the best way is. So I guess I have a practical approach from a business perspective, and I'm interested in seeing how could that be applied in a way that is true to God's plan, just to make things more sustainable. So it's still an open question, I think.
So perhaps it's the returning to the council of outpost centres and people of varying gifts coming together to complete.
Yes, I've been creating these initiatives. So adventleaders.com is a thing. This one here would be adventhomesteads.com. There's a whole piece on that where I say, look, we got to redefine what community looks like, right? We can't be living on an island to ourselves. Now, if you have a big family and you're able to sustain, great. But most of us recognize, I can't run a farm on my own, right? If we're out there, we've got the land, we say, I'm doing what God has told me to do, I'm out here. Yeah, but you spent your entire day just weeding today. What did you do for ministry? What did you do to sustain yourself? Inversely, I spent the entire day making money, but I didn't get out in the field. How do we find this balance of, the logical, the practical, really, and the spiritual? And I think it means coming together with outposts. So adventoutpost.com is another initiative I want to launch, where I believe that we should start having a network where we just start identifying these things and saying, I want to launch an outpost. Here's what I've got. I've got land. I've got 2 buildings. I'm looking for somebody that knows how to start a garden. Come teach me how to start a garden, right? They come through. They're able to. There's a program in the world called woofing, right? We could learn a little bit from that. Now, again, I'm not talking about learning from the ways of Babylonians. I'm just saying that the Babylonians saw some things that God has tried to tell us. And one of those is community. And the ability for workers to come in, learn a little bit, go back to the next place to learn a little more. This was the original plan of the guild model, right? You would go, if you needed to learn, the school of the prophets was there. Your children went and learned from true education from the school of the prophets. Then they figured out, I really like gardening, or I like construction, or I like whatever it is, evangelism, whatever it is. And then they say, okay, go over here, stay with this guy for 2 weeks, stay with this guy for 3 months, stay with this guy for a year. Learn what you can from them, right? And they would journey from city to city, a journeyman. They would journey from city to city and understand, learn more. And eventually they would get to this point, they say, okay, I'm going to use gardening, construction, whatever it is. I've learned different types of construction. Let's just say I'll use construction. I learned how to do brick. I learned how to do, timber frame. I learned light timber framing, right? I learned, these different skills. And I said, I really like whatever it is, electrical. Okay, go stay with this guy. He's an electrician. And he learns a little bit of electrical from this guy, the basics of electricity, how it works. Then he moves to a next place and a next place. And all of a sudden he lands in a home, an outpost, a home, right? With somebody who does photovoltaic PV systems. And he says, wow, we're going to really need this for the time of trouble, right? Let's learn more about this. And now he's able to then maybe start his own business, installing PV systems for Adventists, whatever it is. Or he then says, I just want to go on the missionary route, and I'm going to go from outpost to outpost and help them get their things set up. So there comes different paths. I think the idea is not to have a cookie cutter that everyone has to be forced into. The idea is just, how do we start communicating? How do we start collaborating with each other? Long-winded answers. Now people are afraid to ask a question because they're going to get a 30-minute. Yeah. All right.
I have a question.
Sir.
In your center that you built right now, are you more focusing on leaders, or are you focusing on or kids or youth that they get educated?
So my focus is not on math and English and stuff like that. You need to learn that wherever. Get your GED and come to me. Our focus there is how to solve. And I'll talk more about the program in the next session. But essentially, it's three sections of the program. One is focused on, I won't go into it. But one is focused on really a refocusing, right? Getting back to understanding what's important, resetting what success looks like. Stop thinking about cars, right? And think about heirloom seeds. Right? This idea of switching it up, like see what's important in life. The second kind of piece is really about it's developing character, but a big piece of that is confidence. And so we do construction. Before the program, I asked the guys. I said, "Can you build your own house if you need to? A place for you to stay?" Every one of them's like, "No." Well, what do you need to do that? Well, I need about $150,000. So I've got to go in the world. I got to be a programmer, go in the world, make $150,000 so I can come out here and live as God has said. I said, well, that doesn't make sense. Right? Is it God's path that you go out and do a Babylonian thing so you can serve him? Either he's not a logical God or you don't understand God. Right? It's the latter. So with that, I say, let's learn how to build a house. And so every student built a tiny cabin. Literally, they're beautiful little cabins. And now you say to them, can you build a cabin? Everyone else says, yes, of course, it's easy. Okay? Now, I didn't teach construction. I'm not qualified to teach construction. I taught confidence. I taught problem solving. I taught proactivity. Right? I taught a sense of urgency, attention to detail. Anyone's qualified to teach those. And that's the mental shift. I can't even teach you gardening. I may know a few things, but not compared to most here, I'm sure. Right? But I can still teach you enough about, in this instance, proactivity, prepping your seeds, about attention to detail, care, watering. It's the same core values are applied to just anything. So if you learn those, you can learn to do anything. And that's the point. And so again, it's this idea of my focus is helping people understand that they're not supposed to go wait for 4 years of college, then go another 2 years of specialization, and then go figure out where they're going to find a job. Because if you do the math, we're already past the time amount allotted to us here. Yes, there's not many years left, is what it is. So if you're on that path, and God put that in your heart, then maybe he has a space for you there to reach others that are in that same path. But more than likely, we need to see what God's ways are. And it's not a matter of doing 6 years of theoretical or even 4 years of theoretical, even 2 years of theoretical knowledge before you try and go out and apply it. That doesn't make any sense. And so the focus there is a leadership program for year one and an entrepreneurship program for year two. And so we're going to be starting next year we had 8 students come. Every one of them wants to stay next year. And that, to me, is a testament, knowing that they're not, and it's like a boot camp too. So it's, they're like, it's not the easiest environment. We work really hard there, and yet they still want to stay there, and they want to do the next program. So, all right. Time up, or? I think we have 2 minutes. One last.
Where are you close in Romania?
Brașov, between Brașov and Sibiu, right in the center. Yes. But we're currently in talks with 2 other centers. So one of the students who's the second year, he was with me a year before I came to Bertholf. He's stepped up and said, I'm going to lead the program next year. I said, praise God. And then I said, okay, but God, what am I going to do next year? What do you want me to do? And that weekend, I had 4 centers contact me. And so what I see the opportunity is to start just building a network and start, how can we connect people through some technology, but more than that, with relationships, with prayer, with leadership of a peer mentorship, and also networking programs, mentorship programs. Okay. Yes.
I am thinking about the people of Israel coming out 40 years, they did not practice agriculture, but they had the lesson to trust God,
Mm.
receiving manna every day for their sustenance.
Mhm.
So how did God teach them without that they had nature?
Mhm.
Yeah? And how do you see God teaching them in those 40 years to get out of their mind the Egyptian mentality?
So I think the context is important. They came out, and God marched them a little detour just to reset a little bit, and marched them to the promised land. And then they got there. It wasn't 40 years to get there. They got there, and they didn't trust God. He said, come on, guys, I want to give you the gardens again. It's the land of paradise. Let me give that to you again, and learn about me in paradise. And they said, I don't want to learn about you in paradise. Okay, we'll do another loop, right?
And
So-
they had to reset their taste buds.
Yes. Yes. All right. Thank you, everybody.